on to this review ad with Vineet Madan. He is the Senior Vice President of New Ventures at McGraw-Hill. And of course, as every week, we are also joined by my co-host, Mr. Christopher Dawson of ZDNet Education, and of course, Senior Editor here at EduQuest. Welcome, Vineet, and Chris, of course, glad to have you as a support here.
Of course, and very glad to have you here, Vineet. It sounds like there's some great stuff happening with your efforts.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Should be fun.
So you at McGraw-Hill have just recently published an interesting study around adaptive learning and how some of your products in that space have been implemented in schools, colleges, and the basically also feedback from the educator side on the products. And maybe let's start off with very basic question of what does adaptive learning actually mean beyond it being such a hyped and much buzzed word at the moment?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of buzzwords out there. And so the way I always think about it when I'm trying to explain it to people is we've been in this industrial production model of education for a long time where everyone kind of sits in the same place at the same time and kind of moves up, grade by grade, year by year. And the only real criteria for advancement is age. Now think about that in the workplace, right? So both of you are gainfully employed, as am I, fortunately, right now, in different lines of work in different fields. In all the things that we do in the working world, what criteria get used for advancement, right? It's usually based on competence, experience, your ability to work with others, your ability to solve hard problems, right? And be successful and demonstrate competence and experience in all those things. And so the criteria that's typically employed is not age. Mm-hmm. And so if we try and match that back up with what's happening in the education system, we see that there's actually a pretty big disconnect between those evaluative criteria. So when we think about, and we've been kind of working on this path for 5 or 6 years now, how could learning and education be different with technology? The big question in my mind has been, so do we need to stick with an age-based advancement system, or can we go to more of a competency-based, experience-based model? In which case, learning and instruction become a lot more personalized. So just like driving your car down the highway, we don't all take the same roads at the same time to go somewhere. If you're commuting into New York sometimes like I do, then you do and you sit in traffic. But what typically ends up happening is you find your own path. Some people like the local road, some people like to take the highway, some people like the scenic routes. And that's okay, right? Because we're all going to get to the same place at the end of the day. Some people may take a little longer, some people may get there more quickly, some people might have stops along the way. So just like your driving is personalized, your working career is personalized, and so should be your educational experience, in whether it's K-12 or higher ed or any other part of learning and advancement. And so when I think about what's possible with adaptive learning, what it really means, that's the basic concept, is that it should be your journey through your learning process, through your materials, facilitated by a teacher or an expert guide who really understands what they're trying to teach and convey. But how do you go through it? And that's not going to be the same for everybody, so we should really stop pretending that it is.
So that kind of begs the question, though. I agree with you 100%, and this sort of outcomes-based education is really the holy grail, I think, as far as most educational reformers are concerned. But how do you, and perhaps this is outside the scope of your job, but how do you actually help change the infrastructure and the entire system to lend itself to that?
Yeah, and so one of the things that we highlighted in the paper is that there isn't going to be any one constituent who comes to the party. So it's not going to be just McGraw-Hill saying, I'm going to drive change throughout the entire system. But it's got to be a collective and a consortium of interested individuals and interested parties who are going to work towards this kind of solution. So first we need to agree that it's a solution. And there's a lot of active conversation going on about that right now. But let's presume that we get past that and we say that this is a possible solution, but perhaps not the only solution. Then we got to figure out how do we get people together to basically mobilize the troops to go after this. So I can tell you we've been actively working in Washington, D.C., and we were in fact, I co-led one of the 4 working groups that led to the publication of the digital textbook playbook a couple of months ago by the U.S. Department of Education and the FCC. So, I mean, there was 20, 30 different companies, all from different aspects of this. Some were hardware manufacturers, some were content and learning providers like ourselves, some were software and system providers, some were networking companies and gear and telco companies. And then there are others who were in that room too. And so we're all trying to figure out the same thing, is how do we move towards a solution? And so fortunately in this case, the federal government, backed by a joint effort of Chairman Janikowski and Secretary Duncan, got behind this and said, let's get everyone in a room together and see if we can start driving towards ways to get to a solution. And we came out with that playbook, which is really step one of the process. And now we've all been making our own investments along the way. But also coming out of that effort, a number of us are working together on different pilots and aspects of that experience. So a few months ago, we had an announcement. Actually, Apple had an announcement that we participated in about the iBooks textbooks and things like that. So I think we're going to see more and more portions of this unfold in the years to come. And I'm glad that we've been actively pushing this for about 5 years now, as have been a number of other companies are coming to it more recently. But this is really a space where having the experience, getting in it early, learning about what works and doesn't work in the classroom is critically important, because we need to build on that body of experience to get to the next set of products and services that really get to that competency or experience-based model. And I can tell you from the products we've had in the field the last few years, LearnSmart is one, and Kirsten, I think you've spoken to Jay Chakrapani in our digital group about that in the past, where we're showing students who use that intensely, and a lot of students do now. We've got hundreds of thousands of students using that every day. We're seeing close to a full grade level improvement by the end of a semester. Now, in education, and you guys have been in this and following this for a while now, getting a full grade level improvement from any one change in the system, I don't know how often you've seen that.
No, pretty rare.
Right.
Exactly, yeah. That's hard to achieve, yeah.
Innovations and trying to get a number of folks together to work on aspects of the problem. So certainly there's hardware aspects of it, and that's where we work with Apple and other folks on some of those pieces. There's the software pieces, the platforms, and we've worked with Blackboard and companies there. And then there's kind of just pulling it all together, and we're trying to work through the administration to bring awareness and hopefully funding behind that at some point in time as well. So I think it's really got to be attacking on all fronts.
So we could probably get very easily sidetracked on iBooks author, and I'm certain that Kirsten and I have a few thoughts there. But maybe you want to take us just a little bit through the meat of the adaptive learning initiative at McGraw-Hill. Really kind of what are, when the rubber meets the road, what are we seeing in terms of something that a teacher would have his or her hands on and be presenting to students and working with students with.
Yeah, so two feature programs that we've got in the field now and have had live for a couple of years. So one is LearnSmart, which is something you've talked about in the past, which is an adaptive learning program that's used in addition to other content materials in a course, but it's tailored to that course. So what we've done there is we basically embodied two principles of cognition, which is the typical way of assessing is what do you know. The other part that ends up being critically important in memory and learning is how well do you know that? So I think A plus B equals C is a very different thing from a human memory and processing standpoint to I absolutely know A plus B equals C. In a lot of assessment tools and things like that you see in the field don't differentiate between those two information states. And from what our research has shown is that there's actually a pretty substantive difference in how much people know based on how well they know it. And so it's really important to kind of matrix those two things together. And only then can you really figure out how much does somebody know at a particular point in time. If I know that and how well they know it, I can then figure out what to prompt them on next, how often to prompt them on those things. And then if I don't prompt them on it for another 3 weeks, I think they know it, how often do I come back to those things to maintain those knowledge or information states for people? So that's basically some of the basic science behind LearnSmart, and we've used that in other adaptive tools as well. In the school channel, we've got a very different kind of program going on there just due to the different instructional modality in K-12, which is called the Power of You. And we've been running this in Indiana for a couple of years now. And the interesting piece there is, so we participated in the School of One pilot, the original one that New York City ran a few summers ago. as a middle school math pilot, and so we worked with them, as did another number of other companies. So as we were participating in that, what we realized, it was a very labor-intensive manual effort to glue all these bits of the system together. And so we kind of came away from that scratching our heads saying, so how does this model scale? And we had a hard time figuring it out. So we said, so what would be a scalable version of this model? And we came up with something called the Power View. So we're kind of leveraging our really best-in-class formative assessment platform in Acuity and technologies that we got from our acquisition of the McGraw network about 7 or 8 years ago. We were very active and very early in this space of getting information about what students are learning and exposing that to interested parties, including parents and teachers, in a very digestible and meaningful form, and then providing supplemental or, in some cases, primary instruction based on that. So we've kind of taken some of those early experiences that we had from 7 or 8 years ago, married that up with what we learned from the School of One pilot, and turned that into a scalable technology-driven model for personalizing instruction, still supporting and reinforcing the role of that teacher in the experience, because I think teachers don't go away anytime soon, nor do we want them to. I mean, they're the ones who really are going to work with the students and help them through the process. I don't think we're going to move to an age anytime in the next few years where we're going to 100% computer-based learning. That's been tried in other markets, notably corporate training. And the success rates there aren't great. And so I think the model needs to be perfected and tuned over time. So we're close to that being the primary delivery channel for education, particularly in the school market. But I think those are the two feature things that we've got in the field right now. But we think, understanding what people know, how well they know it, what else they need to know, how much time they have in order to learn that material. So it's one thing to know I've learned 40% of the standards I need to master in third grade, and I've learned them by October, versus I've learned 47% of the standards I need to learn by third grade, and I'm now sitting in May, where I've only got a month left in the school year, right? So that time element becomes increasingly important as well. And a lot of other assessment programs leave that out, but that's something that's dialed into both Power View and LearnSmart, is how much time do you have left to learn things?
I think one of the hardest things is getting teachers to actually use these data and use them well and appropriately to drive instruction, to drive the use of supplements, to drive their course of action, and to really differentiate instruction on their ends. As you're pointing out, I mean, the teacher is still a critical element of this. So, what sort of professional development is one incorporated in this, or two, do you see that as useful with actually getting teachers to be able to make full use of all the myriad of data that come out of these platforms?
Yeah, I think, look, let's start at the first principles here. We want and we need teachers to be very capable and comfortable in using technology to help them drive learning in classroom performance, right? So if we start there as our going in assumption, then you see that professional development and support, whether it's from the school district or from us or from other interested parties, is an absolutely critical element. And that's something that we've been in the teaching and learning space for 80 plus years now. So that's something we've focused on in every program we've developed since long before I started. I'm not close to 80, despite it might look like that over the camera, but,
not at all.
I think when we look at programs we're developing and introducing, particularly programs like this that introduce a very different instructional modality, we're very focused on tailoring and tuning the professional development to the teachers in the circumstance that they're going to be deploying those tools in their schools. And so that's different in every school that you go to. Some schools have high bandwidth in one-to-one laptop or device programs. Okay, well then there's a way you would implement Power View in that context. Other schools might have bandwidth constraints and are still one-to-one. Okay, well there's a different way to implement there. In other places, students may not even have one-to-one devices. You may be getting a laptop card 1 or 2 periods a day rolled in that you can use. Oh, and by the way, the Wi-Fi network doesn't work 40% of the time because there isn't enough bandwidth availability. Okay, so then you got to make sure that some of those applications work offline, and then you work with the teachers to make sure that they've got the right exercises that they can use in that type of constraints. And in that environment, may end up doing a lot of offline work with more one-to-one work driven by an interactive whiteboard, right? So you don't know that until you get into the specific school where it's being used in the specific classroom. And that's where figuring out, well, we've always called this professional development, but I think it's a mix of professional development, meaning helping the teachers to use the tools, and fall somewhere between that and technical support.
Right.
Something that companies like us typically haven't had to do. When was the last time you had to call a help desk to figure out how to get to page 322 on your book? It just hasn't happened, right? So, but that's something that we're learning is increasingly important, and we're making investments to make that support available.
Basically, taking this Microsoft Nook partnership, and Chris and I talked, of course, intensively about this when the news broke. How do you see the importance of tablet devices in classes?
Yeah, it's funny. So, I think there's two aspects of this. One is tablet devices, and then I'll get to the second part in a second. As I look at, technology getting deeper in the classroom, I think we're quickly getting to a point where there's going to be the big question for people: do I continue to buy laptops, because not a lot of folks buy desktops anymore? Do I continue to buy laptops, or do I start looking at tablets as my primary device, using a Bluetooth keyboard or something else as an interface, and use that and a smartphone, because a lot of folks have smartphones too. So I think from that perspective, we can kind of go back and see, what Microsoft's forays in the tablet space have been, and there have been quite a number, and see that, something different was required there. I kind of come back a little bit to the abandoned courier project, but for the sake of not belaboring some of that, I think they had some of the right ideas there. So I think realizing that the tablet space was unfolding very quickly, and we're not, we're close to the middle of this from either perspective, but I think realizing it was unfolding very quickly, Microsoft saw an opportunity to get in with somebody who had established a business in literally just a couple of years. It's pretty amazing how fast this whole space has taken off. People forget the original iPad only hit the street about 2 years ago. 2 years and a couple of weeks ago, right? So it's happening fast. And so Microsoft saw an opportunity to get in, and I imagine it was a pretty attractive valuation with somebody who had established a business already and use that to jumpstart themselves. Obviously for B&N, is a little bit of a lifeline, not dissimilar from the lifeline Microsoft threw Apple about 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing that worked out pretty well for them. I think tablet devices are here to stay, and I think that their role and prominence is only going to increase over time. The last reporting I saw from Apple is somewhere around 2,300 out of 15,000 school districts in the U.S. are testing iPads right now in this school year. I imagine that number is going to increase quite a bit next year, particularly with the entry-level price with the iPad 2 coming down $100. I think that's going to put that within reach of a lot more schools. And so if you look simply on a price perspective, on most schools across the country, you're looking at about 3 students per computer. If you figure your average computer costs you somewhere around $1,000, $1,200, a tablet at $300 to $400 starts you get pretty close to making that decision. Do I buy one computer to share with multiple students, or do I get every student a tablet, right? So this is one of those places where you don't necessarily need to spend more money, you just spend the money differently. So I think that was certainly interesting, and I think, tablets, and whether it's the Nook or the iPad or whatever, are going to play a growing role. I think the other piece of this that hasn't gotten talked a lot about is, I'll come back to a little bit of something we mentioned earlier when we were talking about professional development and tech support, is we're increasingly asking instructors and students to use technology that helps make their lives more efficient and more effective. Well, the rub here is that a large part of the educational system hasn't already taught them how to do that. So we're introducing new tools, whether it's our homework tools like Connect or Learn Smart or Power U and all these things that we've talked about. And, we don't have a retail presence, nor do we plan to do that. But I think there needs to be a place where instructors can go and students can go, and something other than just a phone call where they can get some help and support for all these different things. And so, I've posited for a couple of years now that as bookstores look to remake themselves, why not do that? I mean, there's a very clear need space that's there, and it can be served, and everyone already knows where their campus bookstore is, and you can go there to get help. In a lot of cases, it's help with getting your materials for class or your sweatshirts and other things, but they've got some retail space, and they've got, the ability to track students and staff knowledgeable support, so why not do that, right? So I see that is one of the untapped opportunities here that Microsoft and DNN may end up looking at in the years ahead that folks haven't really picked up on yet.
Last quick question, as we have to let you go. Basically, I'm sure that McGraw-Hill as the company, but probably you being so involved in that field as well, what is your prediction for the future of education?
Wow,
that's an easy one.
The big one at the end, yeah. I know.
That up in about 3 seconds, right? But I think so. We've touched on a lot of good themes in this conversation, so let me see if I can encapsulate some of them quickly. I think technology is going to play an increasing role in both teaching and learning and support. I think we will move very quickly towards personalized learning models, and the adaptive technology with very rich algorithms supported by deep academic research is going to play a critical role in getting us there. I think supporting those teachers and instructors to make sure they're equipped to manage the classrooms as we're going through this evolution is important. And then it needs to be an industry solution to an industry challenge right now. So no one company, whether it's Apple, Microsoft, BNN, McGraw-Hill, or anyone else, is going to solve this on their own. There really needs to be a coalition of the willing who are going to come together and say, look, there are very hard problems to solve in education, and we need to solve them together along with federal and state governments, right? So having the FCC and the U.S. Department of Education, state departments of education, all working together with industry, working with some of the private foundations that are out there, is what's going to be necessary. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity and potential to improve the performance of students in the entire educational system. We're seeing a lot more conversation about how that's important to economic growth in this country and in almost any country you go to. And it's also important to national security. So I think given that it's such a massive imperative, we all are going to work towards this. I know at least we at McGraw-Hill are going to continue to work hard on solving these problems, and are willing to work with a broad range of companies and the government to get it done. So that's a commitment we've made for a long time and we'll continue to make.
Well, I
Excellent.
think we have to let you run now, really. So thank you, Vineet, so much for taking the time and talking with us. And I enjoyed it a lot, and it was really interesting to get both the McGraw-Hill, but also a little bit your personal perspective on all the points we touched on.
Thank you very much. Very much appreciated. Thank you for your time.
Yeah. Thanks for the
Have yourself a great
opportunity,
weekend.
guys. This is
Great.
fun.
Thank you.